so he says to the farmer, what are you doing with that? And he says, well, I'm going to take this home and put it on my strawberries. And the little boy says, well, I don't know where you're from, but we put cream and sugar on our strawberries. So, I don't know whether you're getting manure or cream and sugar today, but you'll have something when you go home to put on your strawberries. Our first slide is going to talk about some of the subjects that we're going to cover as we go through the program today. There we go. Of course, the direct payments are gone. That's what we've been getting for the last few years, of what we've been sending out to you. And they did away, that program is gone, has been eliminated. They are giving you an opportunity to update your yields and your basis and reallocate your base acres on your farms. And then the option to make a program election between PLC and ARC-CO and ARC-IC. And we're going to talk about those in more detail as we go through the program. And then at the conclusion of today's program, we hope maybe you'll have a little better understanding of what's going on and what the timelines are and all of those things that we've got to do in the next few months with your help. And here's some definitions. We're going to be talking about these. I'll try to remind you what they are as we go through. The marketing year average is the 12-month weighted average national price. It includes all grades and all qualities of the crop, and it's averaged out nationwide. And we're going to use that in some of our calculations. And then you remember from the Olympics, they do an Olympic average. They take out the high and the low, and then you average the other three. So we're going to look at 5 years on some of the yields and prices, and we're going to take out the high and the low and average the other three. So that's an Olympic average. The CC yield, or the counter-cyclical yield, is a yield that existed under the previous Farm Bill. And some of you might remember coming into the office and proving those yields to us, and that's carried through as your counter-cyclical yield. And that's going to be important depending on which program you decide to participate in. The covered commodities, we've got a list of them here. Oh, no, we don't yet. The covered commodities are the 21 commodities that were identified in the Farm Bill, in the statute, for which base acres may exist on a farm. And so that's going to become important as we go through some of these definitions and some of the new programs. The payment acres on PLC and ARC-CO is 85% of the base acres for each covered commodity. And then for ARC-IC, it's 65% of the farm's total base acres for all covered commodities. So don't let that 65% scare you away, because it's 65% of the total base acres on the farm. And we'll see how that factors in a little bit later. So we've got several things that we're going to need to do in the next few months. And so, like it or not, you're going to have to come into the office 2 or 3 times probably in the next few months in order to get all of these things accomplished and done in the right order and at the right time. So just a little warning that we may even set up an appointment for you when you're done with your appointment. On the day you come in, we may set up the next one for you, just so you don't forget and you've got that on your schedules, because we're going to need you to come in again. The reason for that is we're doing base acre reallocation and yield updates. That's the first step, and it started in September, and it's going to go through February 27th. So you've got until February 27th to get that done. And then we're going to go into the election. So you'll elect which program you want, or programs you want on each of your farms. Once that's done, then later this summer, we don't know exactly when, but sometime mid-April through the summer of 2015, we're going to enroll all of the farms in either PLC or ARC-CO, or ARC-IC. So quite a bit to do in the next few months, and we did, my folks brought a calendar today, so if you'd like to set up an appointment to come in and reallocate your bases or update your yields, we'll set up an appointment today so you can load it into your smartphones and be ready to come in. I'll give you a little reminder it's coming up that on what you need to bring with you and what you need to know when you come in for each of those appointments. A little bit of change a big change in the payment limitation. Payment limitations this year for 2014 and 2015 are $125,000 for ARC PLC payments received directly or indirectly for all covered commodities except peanuts, and that's $125,000 per person or entity. We'll go into more detail with that when you come into the office. But there's a significant change in how we're looking at payment limitation for this farm bill. I'm going to do a little overview of the ARC, the agricultural risk coverage, and the price loss coverage. There's 3 steps. So I talked about that already. You've got to update your base and yields, and then elect the program, and then enroll. So try to keep those terms straight as we go through the, and I will too, as we go through the program today, because we need to make sure we understand what each of those steps is. Back in July of this year, letters were mailed from our national office, and if you have an interest in a farm as an owner or operator, you've got a copy of that letter for each of your farms, and it had some just basic farm information that you need to know in order to be able to do the base reallocation and the yield updates and all of those things that we've got coming up. So don't panic if you didn't keep your letter or it blew out of the pickup or whatever might have happened. We can get the information for you if you call us or stop by the office. But if you did hang on to that letter, bring it with you when you come in, because it'll be helpful in making some of these decisions. So the first step is updating. So you'll visit your county office to make a final decision on base reallocation and yield updates. The owner and I'm staring at that because my slide's not the same as that one, so Andrea's puzzled too. Step 1 is updating. We'll talk about that. So the owner has to make the decisions on the yield update and on the base reallocation. It's the owner that has to sign off on the paperwork. But as operators, if you're the operator and you have owners on your farm, you'll need to work with them and help them out and help them decide what works best for you and for your owners or operators. So we encourage you to work together, but ultimately it's that owner that has to sign off on the paperwork to make those decisions. We also remind you to gather your crop yield records for 2008 through 2012. That's the information that we're going to need when we update your yields for your farm. So start putting that together, and remember to bring it in with you when you come into the office. Step 2 is the election process. That's a copy of the letter. You can't read it, but that just kind of gives you an idea what it looked like. That's the letter that came out that was mailed in July. So there's that second step, election. You elect PLC, ARC-CO, or ARC-IC on each FSA farm number. And then we change a little bit on who makes the decision on that. Current producers with a share of the cropland on the farm will make a one-time irrevocable program election per farm. So all of the producers on your farm have to sign off on which program you elect. So owners, operators, you may have some other folks that are that have an interest in your farm that will show up on there too. Everybody has to agree and sign off on your election. If you don't make an election, once we get past the PLC or the election period, that's February 27th, once we get past that, then your farm will default to PLC effective for 2015. We won't make any payments for 2014 on any farm that's defaulted into the PLC program. And then,
Marty,
yes.
would you clear up the difference between if it's defaulted into it versus changing?
So you have until February. The question was to define the difference between defaulted farm and farm that's chosen to go into the program. So if you come into the office before February 27th and you pick a program and we give you the paperwork and you take it out and you do all the signatures and all the signing, then that farm will be in that program that you elected. If you don't by that deadline date, then it will default to PLC.
Or if there's a difference in payments?
Difference in payments?
Because you stated if it's defaulted in the PLC,
Oh.
2014.
There will be no 2014 payments. The farm won't be signed up for 2014. It will be signed up in 2015. Yeah, sure.
The deadline for election
Yeah.
is
March 31st is the election deadline, I'm sorry. February 27th is the date to get your base and yield reallocated. So you've got to March 31st to come in. If you don't, your farm won't be signed up for 2014. It'll be in PLC for 2015. And then sometime after that election period is over, you'll get a final notice of base yield and election. So you'll get a letter in the mail that will say what base you chose to maintain on your farm, what yield. If you updated your yield, it will give you your 2014 and 2015 yields, and also what program that farm was elected into. And then the third step is enrollment. So this is the one we don't know exactly when it's going to happen, sometime between mid-April of 2015 and the summer of 2015. We can pretty much guarantee it'll be during wheat harvest, probably, a lot of it. So see if you can work that into your schedule. And then, as usual, acreage reporting is required. Regardless of which program you participate in, you'll need to report your acres each year. Those same dates still apply, November 15th for your fall planted crops, etc., and July 15th for spring planted crops. That covers most of you. Some of you may have some different acreage reporting deadlines. And then if you choose the ARC-IC program, then production reporting will be required. You'll be required to report your production because we're going to use that production to calculate your payments. If you haven't made an acreage report for last fall, for the wheat you planted in the fall, you can still do that. It'll be late filed, but we do encourage you to give us a call and set up a time to come in and report your acres if you planted wheat in the fall. And then payments. 2014 payments will be issued after October 1, 2015, if a payment is triggered in any of those programs. And then the 2015 through 28 payments will be issued after. The MYA, we'll talk about that. That's a nationwide average price is announced. Once those prices are determined and after October 1 of the following year. So payments will be made the year after the program the year that you're participating. So let's look at base acres a little bit, this reallocation of base acres. Those are the 21 covered commodities. These were in statute. This was part of part of the law. Anybody see millet in there? No. Millet didn't make the list. But those are the 21 covered commodities. So if don't write those down or anything. You've got a copy of the slides, and they're in there, so you can look those up and see what crops may apply to your farm. So the Agriculture Act of 2014 allowed us to reallocate base acres. You've got two choices. You can retain the base acres that were in effect on 9/30 of 2013, or you can reallocate those base acres using 2009 through 2012 planted and considered planted history, as you reported on your acreage report. So we'll use those acres that you reported to us. If you had a crop failure, if your wheat blew out during the winter or was hailed out, and you worked it up and were able to plant it to another crop, a subsequent crop, then you'll have a choice of which one of those crops you would like to have count towards your base reallocation. So you might have had wheat, the wheat failed, you planted it to barley or to corn, and you can choose between the wheat and that subsequent crop. So the reallocation of bases will result in the farm's base acres being redistributed in the same proportion to the 4-year average of acres that were planted and considered planted. We're going to go over an example that'll show you, hopefully make that a little more clear. I already mentioned this, but planted and considered planted history includes the initial crop, the initial failed crop, and any prevented planting that you may have had during those years. The reallocation of bases allows for a subsequent crop to be counted. So here's an example of using a subsequent crop. The farm in 2012 had 60 acres of wheat that failed, and then the wheat was replaced by barley. Barley became the subsequent crop, and the owner has to select whether to use the wheat or the barley, but not both. And here's a base reallocation example. This farmer's got 500 acres of wheat base and 100 acres of barley base, and then 50 acres of oat base. That looks a lot like a lot of our farms in Adams County, and probably in Arapahoe too. You've got mostly wheat, a little bit of something, a couple of other things. So he's got a total of 650 acres of base. And then at the bottom of that slide, that's his cropping history. He planted 250 acres of wheat each year in 2009, 10, 11, and 12. So this is the form that we'll show you when you come into the office. Maybe a little hard to read from the back, but what it says is that farmer's got 650 acres of base. He planted 250 acres each year to barley and 250 to wheat. We're going to find out what the reallocation percentage is. So I'll add up all the acres of barley. Comes up to about 1,000. Do that in my head. Divide by 4, that's 250. Same thing with wheat. So if this farmer chooses to reallocate his acres, he can put 50% of his total base into wheat and 50% into barley. So he'd end up with 325 acres of wheat base, 325 acres of barley base. Or he can keep the base just like it was. So the column way on the left and the column on the right are your two choices. Keep it the way it is, or reallocate it based on what crops you planted. Another example here. 500 base acres of wheat, 300 base acres of barley with a total base of 800 on this farm. Do you remember seeing alfalfa on that covered commodity sheet? No, it wasn't on there either. So alfalfa is going to be irrelevant on this example. So we go to the next page, and here's that screen again, or that form again. It shows his current base on the left, the barley base and the wheat base. All he planted was wheat. So his base reallocation percentage is 100% to wheat. So he can choose to have 800 acres of wheat base, or 500 acres of barley base, and 300 acres of barley base, and 500 acres of wheat base. I'll try to look around once in a while and see if there's any questions, but don't be shy. And I think we got one more. This one's a little bit unusual, but it could happen. He's got 400 acres of wheat base, 100 acres of barley base. He's planted mostly alfalfa for those 4 years. But on the last year, in 2012, he planted 100 acres of dry peas. I'm thinking dry peas would have been a good thing to plant in 2012. But we had plenty of dry that year anyway. So he can reallocate his base, and he can have 500 acres of dry pea base, because that's all he planted during those years that counted towards reallocation. Or he can keep his base as is, 400 of wheat and 100 of barley. Any questions on the base reallocation? There's one. Yes, sir.
When you say planting, in case of alfalfa, these are 3 or 4 year crops. Does the history count? Previous years' history?
He's asking if the previous history counts on alfalfa. No, well, alfalfa doesn't count anyway. It's not a covered commodity.
Or I think he's asking if it was previously planted and harvested. If he planted it in 2008, and it was alfalfa for the next 4 years, can we count that as alfalfa acres? Because you don't plant alfalfa every year, is this question?
They'll count as alfalfa acres, but they won't count towards the base reallocation because they're not a covered commodity. So can we go backwards, Andrea? So he did plant alfalfa all 4 of those years where he had alfalfa. But the only crop that he planted that's a covered crop is dry peas. So when we do the calculation, you won't see alfalfa on that example anywhere, because it doesn't count towards that base reallocation. There's no such thing as alfalfa base. So his only choice is to keep his base like it is, or to put it into dry peas. Yes, sir.
I'm trying to figure out how you get to the 500 from that 100 over there. Is there?
Yeah, because it was planted, he's asking about how do we get to 500 acres of base from that 100 acres of dry peas. What we're doing is we're looking at 4 years of planting history of covered crops. Only the covered crops, those 21 crops we looked at. Dry peas is the only thing he planted that's a covered crop. So since he planted 100 acres of dry peas in 2012, we take 100 acres of dry peas, we divide it by 100 total acres that were planted, and that means he's got 100% of his reallocation has to go to dry peas if he chooses to do that. So the 500 acres comes from the 400 acres of wheat base and the 100 acres of barley base. That 500 acres becomes 500 acres of dry pea base. So it turns out it's going to be kind of important what you planted over that 4-year period if you want to reallocate your base. Yes, sir?
Go back to example 1, and instead of a 50-50, do a 60-40, so I can understand a little better how that works.
Okay. So he's asking if we go back to that first example. There it is.
So if you had 60%.
Okay, so let's go one more. Let's just go to that screen with the yellow on it. Can we do that? There we go. So if that percentage of what he planted to barley and to wheat came out to 60% barley and 40% wheat of his total acres, so we divide the total acres planted to barley by the total acres of covered crops that were planted on that farm, and it came out to 60%. Then we're going to take 60% times the total amount of base he's got, 650 acres. Somebody got a calculator? 60% of 650?
390.
390. So he could have 390 acres of barley base, and then 40% of his base would go to wheat.
So the total number of base acres is going to stay the same under all circumstances?
Yes, base acres will never change. You'll have, after you reallocated, you're going to have the same total acres of base that you had before. I should have said that, and that may have helped out with some of the questions, but the total amount of base that you have isn't going to change. Yes, ma'am. The microphone's coming. Can you hang on just a second? He's green screened it to you. He's running.
What if you, of course you'll have the same acreage, but what if you're reducing the amount that you're growing on that total acreage? How does that work in your base then? Because we did that. We took a field and actually split it. We were farming it, the total acreage, and then we're splitting it up into 2 fields instead of 1.
Okay, we're just gonna divide the total acres that you planted to a particular crop, and we're gonna divide it by the total acres that were planted that year of covered commodities. So it's just gonna be that percentage of the total base, the total acres that were planted for that year. Does that make sense? Okay. Anything else? Okay. And then we're going to talk about yield updates a little bit.
Hey, Marty,
Yes, sir.
what if you have a field that's coming out, or production that's coming in new that was CRP for 4 years, 4 years?
Okay, he's asking about CRP. As you recall, sometimes when you had CRP on your farm, we had to reduce your base because your total acres of CRP plus your total acres of base couldn't exceed your cropland acres on the farm. So if you added your base and your CRP together and there was more acres there than you had total cropland acres, then we had to reduce the base. What we'll do is if a field comes out of CRP, we'll give you that base back. And then we'll do the, for this year, this base reallocation is a one-time thing. So if that base comes out of CRP 2 years from now, it'll just be whatever base was taken away will come back. Is that okay? Okay.
Can you move your base from one tract to the other? You own a couple of farms, can you move one base from one farm to the other?
No, you can't move it from one farm to the other. You can move base from one tract to another on the same farm.
So if it's 2 different farm numbers, you can't move it?
No. That's right. That's what they're saying. Okay, so the payment yield update, everybody okay with the base reallocation? If you have questions, try to catch one of us after we get done today, and we'll help you out with that. Yeah, Charlie.
Well, are some of these crops better, corn better than barley, or corn payment-wise in general in the smooth farm programs? Because your base acres are staying the same as they were on that left-hand column versus the right. So if I had grain, sorghum, or barley, way back when had corn now,
It's a good question, but I'm not going to answer it.
I mean,
He's asking about, are some crops better than others? Is it better to have corn, grain sorghum base as opposed to barley base? And I can't answer that, but Brent might be able to help you out with that when you go through some of those tools.
Yeah, we'll talk about, I'll show you a couple of online tools that'll help you make that decision.
Brent's the decision maker. He's made. We're not allowed to make decisions, so. Yes, sir.
If you had strictly wheat based on corn, and you planted corn the last 4 years.
Wait for the microphone. Kent's the only one that can hear you.
You had strictly wheat based on corn, and you planted corn in the last 4 years, then reallocate where you had no corn base before you can reallocate this time?
Yes, and that's the, one of the situations when this is going to work, hopefully to your advantage. If all you planted was corn over that 4-year period, the only base you had on your farm starting out was wheat, you're going to end up, you can either keep the wheat base as it was, or you can have 100% corn base. And there'll be quite a bit of that going on as we go through these decisions. Okay, so yield, payment yield update. And this is on a crop-by-crop basis. When we were talking about base, it's the whole farm. It's every kind of base you got on that farm. You can either keep it like it is, or you can reallocate it. With the yields, we're going to look at it crop by crop. And you'll be able to retain the crop's counter-cyclical yield from the 2008 Farm Bill, or you'll be able to update the farm's yield based on 90% of the 2008 through 2012 average yield per planted acre. And then there's some special situations for zero plantings and prevented planting, but we'll talk about that. And then that note down at the bottom, for those bad years when you maybe didn't have any production, or your production was really low, we won't, when we're doing that average, we won't let that year's yield drop below 75% of the county average that year. I think one of our examples shows where that helped somebody out.
Marty, a question as far as the yields. If my understanding is correct, it's a blended yield between irrigated and dry land, is that correct?
Yes. His question is about a blended yield between, if you have irrigated corn on your farm and also dryland corn on your farm, when you get to the 2014, the new Farm Bill programs, you're going to have a blended yield between the irrigated and the non-irrigated. It'll be some type of a weighted yield. So.
Does that mean if you're planting dryland corn, you probably don't want to update your yield because the blended yield would be higher than yours? Am I getting that right?
Well, you want to take advantage of getting a higher yield if you can.
Is there a program or way we can tell if indeed you want updated or not updated?
Yes, and we will help you with that because you'll bring in your production evidence to us and we'll load it into a, he's talking about, is there a program or something that can help you figure that out, whether you're going to want to update your yields or not. And there is a program, in your handout, there's a page that's got some links on it, website links, and you can go into the USDA FSA website and there's a link that will help you calculate your yields. So this is one of those situations that if you can raise your yield, you're stuck with that blended yield. But if you can raise that yield, because it could help you if you got more irrigated acres than dryland acres, then your yield is going to be weighted towards the dryland or towards the irrigated yield. But there are some things that'll help you out. Brent, I don't know whether you touch on that or not, but there are some things that'll help you out making your decision on yields.
Both of the tools will help you with the yield update as well.